Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a very important conversation on what comes next for Jamaica after Hurricane Melissa struck about 2 weeks ago. This is a conversation about ways to mobilize regional and international cooperation to support long-term recovery and resilience in the region. I'm no stranger to hurricanes, having lived in Miami for a number of years, but Hurricane Melissa is really defying the definition of Category 5. The hurricane rapidly intensified as it crossed unusually warm waters, exactly the kind of climate damage and climate disaster extremes that are becoming much more frequent. In Jamaica, officials have described entire communities demolished or isolated, including hearing that a third of the island is now completely destroyed, as you can see from the video that is playing. The storm then tore across other islands where there was also deadly flooding, which has added to the overall damage. Early estimates suggest insured losses of $2.2 to $4.2 billion. Jamaica's prime minister has flagged a hit equivalent to an estimated 30% of GDP. These are numbers that speak to a disaster of historic proportion. The U.S. has committed new emergency support, and regional health and relief agencies are scaling quickly. This is the time to rebuild and rebuild better. And this is precisely why we must work to strengthen resilience. It reinforces the importance of coming together to update disaster relief strategies across the Caribbean. Today should serve as a call to action. Convenings like these are where we can bring governments, the private sector, and communities to turn lessons into actionable projects backed by the necessary financing that can help to mitigate risk before the next storm. And there will be a next storm. Resilience in these scenarios isn't just about bouncing back. It's about moving forward together, especially as we know that more Melissa-like storms are brewing on the horizon. I would like to take a moment to thank the panelists who will join us and who will share their insights, some from on-site in Jamaica, and give us some ways forward. It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, the Honorable Mr. Matthew Samuda. Minister Samuda is leading Jamaica's recovery efforts, overseeing the water, environment, climate change, and blue and green economies portfolio. Throughout his work, he has consistently championed the principles of environmental preservation and protection. Mr. Samuda, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for your warm welcome, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for convening this discussion at a critical time in Jamaica's history. A little over 2 weeks ago, Jamaica started feeling the effects of Hurricane Melissa. People, focus on landfall, but persons should remember that we had significant rainfall for approximately 3 to 4 days before the storm would have actually hit or made landfall. And that would have been also 3 or 4 days of intense rainfall on the back end of your rainy season. So what you ended up facing was catastrophic flooding in many areas because of the saturation of much of your soil. But first, I think it's important to note what we actually faced. We faced the strongest storm in a century, the first storm that may well end up being considered the first Category 6 hurricane. This was no ordinary tropical storm, right? The wind speeds that were recorded of over 250 miles an hour would have had catastrophic impacts on almost all infrastructure anywhere in the world. But when one contemplates the developmental challenges that Jamaica would have had over the last 50 years, you'd know that we don't have hardened infrastructure that could even begin to mount a challenge such a storm with gusts, as mentioned. Now, you are correct. A third of the island did receive catastrophic damage, with 51% of our forests also receiving significant damage. We're still assessing the impact on our marine environment. From satellite imagery, we've been able to assess that over 190,000 buildings have been damaged, or 146,000 as a subset of that being major damage. It's approximately, if you think of the 800,000 tons of waste that we normally would generate in the third of the island that's most damaged, we've already determined that the rubble and the waste and the other issues that you have already quadrupled that amount in terms of what our waste management companies would have to deal with. We've already confirmed over 40 deaths. We expect that through investigation, that number will climb closer to 60. And it obviously will have a significant impact on our GDP. That will have the knock-on effect of negative impact on our debt to GDP ratio. We had estimated that Jamaica's economy would have become investment grade next year relative to our falling debt to GDP ratio. We were able to maintain a downward debt trajectory despite COVID, despite the bump of COVID, despite the bump of Hurricane Beryl last year, which was a Category 4 storm, which did affect the southwest of the island, not go straight across, but did affect the island significantly as well. The estimates could take debt to GDP up from 63% back up to somewhere between 80 and 90% because of this single weather event. And that's unfortunate for a country that has invested so heavily in achieving macroeconomic stability over the last decade or so, actually, maybe 12 or 13 years, if we look at all of the reforms. But that just shows you the level of risk that SIDS indeed face. Caribbean is indeed the most disaster-prone region on Earth, and it does put us on the front lines of the climate crisis. And for us, the climate crisis isn't a matter for debate. We're not diving much into the geopolitics that we face today, but for us, we're very settled and sure that climate change has indeed played a role in much of the damage and loss of life that we've faced. Climate attribution studies have already pointed to the fact that this storm was stronger, more likely at this time of the year, because of the fact that the climate has changed. So we're settled that it has played a role, and that we're feeling the effect because of same. And when one contemplates the Herculean task of the varying phases of disaster recovery, we're happy to see partners from SEDEMA and the CRIF on the platform, and I want to especially acknowledge them and thank them for their own work in coordinating efforts in the initial phases of the recovery. As you phase it and you think of the immediate humanitarian needs and you contemplate recovery and rebuild phases to come, when you understand the significant economic impact and the capacity constraints of a nation like Jamaica, you understand what the sort of road that is ahead of us. So, every time I hear, and we say it too, I find myself saying that we need to build back differently. But the challenge you face is when you have 146,000 buildings with major damage, when you have hundreds of thousands of people that are living now in housing stock that is not fit for habitation, if they're in housing stock at all, you're faced with the sort of challenge of short-term urgent need and how much of your fiscal space you dedicate to short-term needs relative to the fact that people can't sleep looking up at the stars every night for the next 3 years while you rebuild the better, right? So that is one of the challenges that a small economy faces. The trade-off to immediately provide relief relative to the long-term building effort. And even though we do enjoy or have enjoyed to this point a decade of macroeconomic stability and downward trajectory of your debt. An event like this turns around and shrinks that capacity, which was not where you wanted it to be to start. You were just about to hit, we believe, the sort of environment that would allow us to truly unlock our economic potential. It felt like the plane was on the runway about to lift off. No, our resolve is bent, not broken. We do intend to build with resilience, but we do have to do so with a conscience. We do have to depend on our partners to help primarily with the relief effort in the first place, so that too much of our internal capacity is not dedicated just to the humanitarian mission, that we're able to actually focus on building in a manner that can withstand what is the new era of climate change, that can withstand multiple crises back to back. I remind people the hurricane season isn't over, and waters are still much warmer than they should be in November. And it's interesting that we're having this discussion right while the COP30 meetings are underway, and quite chaotically so, it would seem. And that's for us an interesting dichotomy. We're living the real realities of climate change, while others are debating A, if it's real, and B, what they should do about it, while countries like Jamaica and colleagues and friends in places like Vanuatu and Palau call me and share their own experiences with sea level rise, etc. And you're faced to both pick up the pieces and then told, well, build stronger, build better. With a per capita GDP of 5,000 to 6,000 US dollars, your capacity to build better is very limited. So it means that forums like the one that we're on is particularly important for a number of reasons. One, it requires international attention and international intent if we're to build back stronger. So bringing attention to this matter is something that we're thankful for the Atlantic Council doing this morning. It also requires serious and focused knowledge share to make sure that the experts which are listed on your panel are indeed able to share best-in-class experiences and steps that we should be taking. My team is indeed listening in, and we'll be happy to hear the perspectives of those who have dealt with this over a long period of time. But Jamaica is very clear that as we build, we're going to build for 100-year, 200-year storms. It's not necessarily the most politically expedient thing to do, but we're very focused that this won't break us. This won't define how we choose to develop. And I'll share with you two numbers in terms of those costs that we've received for two projects that must be done, that this storm has shown that is just not optional. If we are to run our power lines from the northwestern Bogue power plant to about 5 miles beyond our Montego Bay airport, the cost will be about underground to make the system resilient, to make sure that your tourism product is able to stand up immediately after, so you don't have, or you limit the fiscal impact of such an event. That's approximately 59 million US dollars, right, to run the wires underground. The cost of restoring the wires without the hardened infrastructure so that we get back energy immediately is 2 million US dollars. So the cost of resilience is not cheap. The cost of necessary coastal revetment works for Kingston Harbour, for the 28 kilometers of the Kingston Harbour, which is our assessed to need it, is $10 million a kilometer. Now that unlocks no new jobs, that doesn't reduce poverty, simply de-risks investments made previous. So that gives you an idea of the scale of the challenge. I heard the initial estimates of the value of damage. It's a little higher. It's closer to 7 billion US dollars as we continue to assess areas and move through. We've identified certainly where $1 billion is available to Jamaica. So you look at the impact and you know that we've lost $6 billion overnight. And it's a very heavy hit. It'll certainly prompt, I think, very frank discussions as I travel to Brazil tomorrow to spend the last week of negotiations with the teams. But we're at a crossroads, right? The nations like Jamaica are going to sink or swim. But there's no illusion that we face that the seas are rising. There's saltwater intrusion in our wells is creating a situation where we have reduced soil quality, reduced or deteriorating soil quality rather, reduced pollination rates, longer droughts, more extreme heat, more periods of intense rainfall, where we've had several rainfall events over the last 3 years, where in 2 hours we've had more than a month of rainfall. Right? So all of the worst parts of the Bible are visible here in Jamaica now, but we do intend to work with our partners to build back in a way that gives us a fighting chance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Samuda. Really appreciate your time and reinforce the commitment of the Atlantic Council to Jamaica, especially at this challenging moment. I'm Jason Marzek, Vice President, Senior Director at the Adrian Arch Latin America Center here, which houses our Caribbean initiative, and I have the pleasure of now moderating a panel. I want to just begin by picking up a few of the points that you made, just to reinforce them. The strongest storm in a century. That might be the first Category 6 storm that we've seen. 190,000 buildings damaged, 146 with major damage. Not only the devastation across the island, but also the forests that you mentioned as well. As well as I think the important point that we'll also talk about further in this panel is the short-term needs for relief with the long-term needs for building even more resilient infrastructure, but doing so with limited fiscal capacity and as a smaller country. As you said, the cost of resilience is not cheap. So I think based with all that, I want to dive into those comments further as part of this conversation here on raising further awareness on the needs and the importance of Jamaica at this moment, but also looking to the future. We're going to hear from experts today, both on the ground and recovery planning, about the immediate needs, the lessons learned, and also what comes next for Jamaica and for the wider region as well. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers. I'm pleased to be joined by a non-resident senior fellow here at the Caribbean Initiative at the Atlantic Council, Patricia Francis. Patricia chairs Jamaica's Trade Facilitation Task Force. She's also led the International Trade Center and Jamaica Promotions Corporation and focuses on economic empowerment, trade, and sustainable development in the Caribbean. We just posted the other day on a great article that she wrote with my colleague Maite, looking further into Jamaica's needs at this point. And Patricia is joining us currently from Jamaica. We're also joined by Elizabeth Riley. Elizabeth is the Executive Director of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, which is a leading regional disaster, and she's been leading regional disaster management efforts for the last 5 years. She's over 20 years of experience coordinating responses to major emergencies, including hurricanes Irma and Dorian. And Elizabeth is joining us today from Barbados, but just came back from, I believe, 2 weeks in Jamaica. Just came back today from 2 weeks in Jamaica. And then we're also joined by Isaac Anthony. Isaac has served as the CEO of CCRIF since 2013, has over 25 years of experience in public finance, economic planning, and financial sector supervision. Isaac previously held senior government roles in St. Lucia, including permanent secretary of finance. And Isaac is joining us today from Belen as part of down there for COP30. So here, as I mentioned, here at the Atlantic Council and our Caribbean Initiative, we've been working with our partners and fellows like Patricia to continue this conversation and supporting in any way that we can. So check out our social media for more information and ways that you can support Jamaica and the region. I want to begin with you, Patricia. Patricia, you've been there. You're in Kingston, while your family is out west. You and I have spoken, and you've seen the devastation firsthand, which as the minister pointed out, is overwhelming. Can you begin by sharing some of your initial reactions to what you've witnessed and the scale of the impact?
Thank you very much, Jason, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for hosting this event today, which I think, as you have said, is critical and important to remain on the front page of people understanding what's happening here in Jamaica. Needless to say, what we saw and who have been affected in the West has been one of the most emotional experiences of my life. What I saw and what all Jamaicans have seen in the images since is devastation on a scale we have never experienced. It's truly unprecedented and truly apocalyptic. From a technical standpoint, the scale of the destruction represents a systemic shock to every pillar of Jamaica's economic and social infrastructure. As Minister has said, the critical infrastructure failure was a multi-point collapse affecting transport corridors, water systems, electricity distribution, and healthcare facilities. The environmental degradation has been widespread. Watershed destabilization, severe landslides, coastal erosion, and loss of agricultural assets across 80,000 acres of land. And I have to say that this is 80,000 of our most productive land. The humanitarian impact has also been, huge, with the mass displacement of communities, some isolated due to infrastructure collapse, and of course the macroeconomic implications, which the minister has already spoken to, whether it be 7 to 12 in damages of US dollars, 8 billion to 12 billion, which is equivalent to about 25 to 35% of our GDP. And the minister's already spoken to what that means in terms of our debt to GDP ratio. What I've seen is unprecedented, but it also underscores why Jamaica's reconstruction cannot simply replace what we lost. We must rebuild to higher climate resilient standards, supported by predictable, well-structured financing. And while we face all of those challenges of how we actually implement that, the image of families standing where their homes once were represents immense trauma, yet remarkable resilience. I just want to finish by saying that the relief efforts have been so generously supported by our international partners. And we know that there is great need still, but we want to ensure that we're working together to make something happen here.
But just I want to pick up on your point on the relief efforts before moving to Elizabeth. What have you seen insofar as the most urgent need for local communities?
The most urgent needs are simple: safe shelter, food, clean water. That's the most important thing. And then, of course, the restoration of livelihoods, because people need to be able to go back to work, even that before the basic utilities are put in place, like electricity. But the challenge has been meeting those needs quickly and fairly. We have so many actors trying to help: government agencies, the Jamaica Defense Force, the UN system, NGOs, community groups, and the coordination is extremely difficult. The decision by the government to put the Office of Disaster Preparedness in the Office of the Prime Minister, I think, is a good thing, because it's such a complex effort. Now, reaching remote communities is another major challenge. Some areas remain cut off because the roads and infrastructure have completely collapsed. And in moments like this, we know that transparency is essential, because people in distress become, disturbed and frustrated, and that frustration can actually turn into mistrust. Yeah. And we need to ensure that support reaches the people who need it most, and that the process is open and accountable.
Thank you, Patricia.
Finally, I just mention one thing. There's a thing called a digital twin technology, which is essential in living. It's like a living digital model for our damaged infrastructure. And it can allow us to do simulations of Cat 5 storms before we even spend a dollar. So using this kind of technology, I think, would be important in rebuilding Jamaica.
Patricia, that's a very excellent point as we look at not just the short-term needs and the immediate recovery, but also, as the minister said, how does Jamaica build back? Elizabeth, I want to go to you. As I mentioned at the outset, you're the executive director of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. You just came back from 2 weeks in Jamaica. Relief efforts are ongoing. The needs are immense, as Patricia has said, and the minister has said. What are you seeing on the ground? What is, and from your perspective, especially having led the recovery to other major emergencies in the Caribbean, what are you seeing insofar as the most immediate needs for Jamaica right now? And also, where is international assistance arriving effectively, and where do you see some of those gaps?
Yeah, thank you. And first, let me express solidarity with the government and people of Jamaica through the Honorable Minister. Yes, very humbling experience to be on the ground in Jamaica for the last 2 weeks, but also I think very rewarding from the perspective of just the amazing spirit of the Jamaican people as they're facing a very challenging situation. So in terms of the needs, so I think the presenters before me have spoken to the tangible needs. So I want to more speak about the principles in terms of the needs going forward, and maybe to talk about three of those. First of all, I think it is really important that as we continue this journey, and it's going to be a long journey, that the international community is committed to be guided by the priorities set by the government of Jamaica. And this is an important message, that any support that is delivered to the country is in alignment with national level priorities. Second, it's about the commitment to medium and long-term support. As the Honorable Minister and Patricia indicated before me, this is not a sprint. We are seeing the immediate short-term requirements at this time, but Jamaica is going to be on a long road to recovery. And the needs are going to evolve over time, as they always do in these types of events. And as more assessments are undertaken and there's a better understanding of the extent of the impact across people, across sectors, it's critical that there is that long-term support to assist in Jamaica. And third, I want to speak about the recovery process. So the business that we're in, humanitarian work, is about people. And the recovery, in principle, must be people-centered. Patricia spoke about the loss of livelihoods. And this is a critical issue, because usually we know through social welfare systems that there are persons within the population that, yes, they are vulnerable. But what happens in events like this is that many persons lose their livelihoods, whether they're working in the tourism sector, fisheries, agriculture, and it then expands the number of persons who are then dependent on government for some type of support. It may be in the short term, it may be in the longer term, but these are all issues that the government will have to grapple with over time. And in addition, the recovery in principle must be driven by the science. The Honorable Minister talked about climate change, and this event, I think, has shown us a number of lessons that we need to apply to how we are preparing our countries, but also how we're capitalizing on the opportunity for recovery in Jamaica. And just one quick example. So usually, and Jamaica has done a great job of this, there are storm surge maps that are prepared, there are flood maps that are prepared, and certainly we had those for the southern areas of Jamaica. But what happens when you have a scenario like Melissa, where we had a 13-foot storm surge pushing inland and 20 to 30 inches of rainfall on saturated ground with extensive flooding? What it means is that your storm surge maps and your flood maps, because they're based only on consideration of individual hazards, they're rendered essentially useless in terms of the planning. And so these types of complex interactions, science-driven, evidence-based, have to be a basis for the recovery efforts.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for laying out those principles and further adding to the complexity of the situation that Jamaica is facing, both now and as we look ahead. And Isaac, I want to turn to you. Planning for recovery, as we're discussing, begins even as relief continues. Based on what Patricia and Elizabeth and the Honorable Minister have shared, what are you prioritizing in the early stages of recovery? And also, what are some of the types of insurance or financial tools that are being considered, which is so vital to protect communities from future storms?
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. And let me also thank the Atlantic Council for hosting this very important event. I'd also like to take this opportunity to extend my commiserations with the government and people of Jamaica for this unprecedented disaster and, of course, the loss of lives. Let me say, though, that at CRIF, our immediate priority, because we are an insurance company, is to ensure that we achieve our key value proposition of making payouts on time, making it within 14 days. And of course, that is to governments and other members to ensure that we provide the liquidity that is necessary, that is the cash, to help stabilize essential services, health, education, infrastructure, as well as social protection. Of course, once our policy or the policies of the government is actually triggered, CRIF undertakes an independent loss calculation procedure, as well as claims management process involving the members whose policies have triggered, as well as the claims settlement. As you know, a significant part of our risk is actually transferred to the reinsurance market. So while countries or members transfer risk to CRIF, we also offload some of that risk to the reinsurance market. So clearly they share in that risk. In addition to that, we also have to undertake the cash management because we're talking about a significant amount of resources. We don't have a lot of cash just sitting around idle. We need to make sure that we invest those funds to be able to generate income or returns. So we go through all this process. And let me say, and again, I'm sure everybody has already heard, that CRIF was actually able, at least the policies for the government of Jamaica, more specifically the tropical cyclone policy, was able to trigger a payout of $70.8 million. And also on the excess rainfall policy, a further $21.1 million was actually triggered, resulting in a total of $91.9 million to the government of Jamaica. This, of course, would enable the government of Jamaica to complement its existing efforts on the ground and to respond, decisively across sectors where, of course, the support is needed most. And let me take this opportunity to confirm that we have settled the full $91.9 million to the government of Jamaica. So just to make the point that what really CRIF promises to its members is clear: to deliver fast, transparent, and a rules-based financial support within 14 days of the event. But looking ahead, you did ask about additional products, and let me say that in addition to the tropical cyclone and excess rainfall and earthquake products that we offer, we have additional ones, such as products for the fishery sector. In fact, this is one area that we have started engaging the government, not just the government of Jamaica, but several other countries in the region, because we know how vulnerable those coastal communities are, how dependent they are on fisheries. And unfortunately, given what happened in Jamaica, a lot of the fisher folk would have lost their livelihoods. And I'm pleased to say that we do have a fisheries product that could certainly help to de-risk that sector. We also have products for electric utilities and water utilities. And again, I heard Minister Samuda speaking about those sectors that have been hard hit. Again, we do have products that can certainly help there. And we do currently in the process of developing and soon to be launched a multi-peril agricultural insurance product that we would be making available to all our member countries.
Thank you so much.
Several others, and of course, we look forward to doing more.
Wonderful. Thank you, Isaac. I also want to remind our viewers, if you have a question, we have about 10 minutes for our panel, but if you have a question, you can submit that via askac.org. That's askac.org. I want to ask an important question, which is the premise of, frankly, why we're convening this event today. which is the fact that this event is being watched by viewers around the world through ACTV, and I think probably many viewers who want to help. Elizabeth, you mentioned earlier, insofar as your three principles, one principle should be the international community relief efforts should be guided by Jamaican priorities and in consultation with Jamaica. What key message, and I'll start with you, Patricia, what key message would you like viewers to hear about the current needs on the ground and the ways in which those who are listening to this conversation who want to help, what would be your advice to them?
Very importantly, we are a resilient country, as many have said before, but the scale of this whole event exceeds our local fiscal capacity. So therefore, what I think is important is direct support to trusted relief organizations, which is very important in this particular time. Then I think what we should be considering is a multi-donor reconstruction and resilience fund. That could be designed with strong governance, predictable disbursement rules, and independent oversight. And I think importantly also, technical expertise. Minister spoke about capacity, and I think we're going to need additional capacity, engineers, hydrologists, resilience planners, financial modelers, all of this to support our reconstruction. And most importantly, what this program is trying to do, which is to remain engaged throughout the multi-year recovery, not just during the emergency period.
Yeah, very, very important. Elizabeth?
Yeah, thank you. So I fully endorse Patricia's comments. I think the guidance from the National Recovery Plan, which is already under discussion in country, I think is going to be absolutely the pathway for channeling the international support. I also, as mentioned earlier, feel that the needs of the country. Remember, I know that the team is, as I left Jamaica, that they were working on preparing a new needs list to reflect some of the realities subsequent to the impact, because the original needs list had predated the actual impact. So I know that those are evolving needs and persons should look at it. But I also feel that, for example, in the diaspora, persons can think about cash, because the cash gives countries and governments the type of flexibility that they need to address needs as they arise.
Thank you, Isaac. I want to turn to you as we look at as we look ahead and we look at strengthening resilience, which is important, as we've discussed. As part of this is the immediate short term, but also looking out longer term as well. Financial tools like CCRF have played a critical role in helping Jamaica, as you've discussed in your first intervention, helping Jamaica manage disaster risks. In your opinion, how can some of these tools be strengthened to help Jamaica, but also other countries, recover faster, protect vulnerable communities, as we look to the high likelihood, frankly, of a continuation of these types of storms that will impact Jamaica and other islands across the Caribbean?
Yeah, and so that is exactly why CRIF was established in the year 2007. And again, you'd recall, it was Hurricane Ivan in the year 2004 that in some sense provided the motivation for the heads of government to say, look, we cannot continue that way without putting the pre-financial arrangements in place. That led to the creation of CRIF. And I'm pleased to say that we have gotten to a point where we are now approaching $500 million in actual payouts. But the key thing now is to see how, number one, we can help countries scale up. I think a lot of people were very surprised by the magnitude of the recent payout that we made to Jamaica and didn't actually realize that countries could buy so much coverage. One of the things that we keep underscoring to our members is that based on our current approvals from our regulator, we can actually provide up to $150 million per peril per country. And so there is still some latitude for closing that gap. That's the first thing. The second thing that I want to underscore, and I must say Jamaica has led the way on that risk layering approach. which has worked very well. And clearly, you saw the cat bond, being at the level of the category 5 or the higher levels of risk, but CRIF coming at the bottom of that, but moving right up to the layers here. So clearly, I would really encourage countries to take a similar approach. But more than that, it is important for us to look at sectors, not just providing insurance for governments, but looking at sectors similar to some of what we've been doing. So, for example, we do have products for the fishery sector, for the electric utilities, for the water utilities. We are also looking at developing products. In fact, we are very advanced in developing this multi-peril agriculture insurance. But the other point that I want to make before I end is on the individual, which is at the microinsurance level. And I'm pleased to say that in collaboration with the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, we've developed a livelihood protection policy targeting the individuals, which, by the way, I will be socializing the government and other authorities to when I meet, when I go to Jamaica on the week of the 24th. This particular product is going to be made available to a broad range of individuals: fisher folks, agricultural workers, tourism workers, seasonal workers, a whole range of people who can help purchase that, who can certainly purchase that product to help address some of their most critical needs following a disaster. So these are some of the things that I would just like to highlight before I end. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. I want to bring in a question that I received. We have about 5 minutes here, so I want to bring in a question I received beginning maybe with Elizabeth. There's a question from Melissa Torr Thompson, who's in Newark, Delaware, asking, it's a two-part question, but also asking, and this was discussed a little bit, but how can Jamaicans abroad help to contribute to relief efforts? And there's actually, maybe I'll kind of actually give you a two-part question, Elizabeth, which is also a question from Luz Vargas, which are and we talked about this a little bit, but what are some steps that can be taken now to ensure that recovery funds are used effectively and reach the highest impact areas most quickly? I think we've talked about that further, but I want to bring that question in as well. Then I'm going to come to you, Patricia, with the last question.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So with respect to the diaspora, first of all, I think it's really important for those efforts to be coordinated. And I know I'm confident that the representation of the government of Jamaica in many of the metropolitan centers are coordinating that. So it's important to plug into those arrangements. As I mentioned, I think cash is a practical way because of the distance and just the logistics of moving items. So cash contributions, the government of Jamaica has provided a website on supportjm, I believe it is .com. But certainly you can look it up on the website. And in terms of the effective use of resources, etc. So one of the things I want to mention is that in the rebuilding process, SEDIMA, for example, just a year and a half ago, prepared in collaboration with the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality, a code of practice for resilient residential construction, which allows for a design that can withstand Category 5 hurricane winds and also Richter scale 7 earthquakes. And this is something that we've been discussing with our colleagues at the Planning Institute of Jamaica. I had some meetings with them over the last 2 weeks while it was there. And also there are, I think, an array of technical skill sets across the region. I think this was raised by Patricia earlier on the need for getting additional technical skill sets. We can certainly support with that through our Caribbean Resilient Recovery Facility as well.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. And Patricia, I want to go to you with an important last question, which is looking at the private sector. I think many people are watching, have been to Jamaica, probably a lot as tourism, and there's an important presence of the international private sector in Jamaica, but also, of course, local private sector. And the private sector is an important part of recovery and resilience. What can companies do to help rebuild and also invest in stronger communities, and what is your perspective as far how businesses as well can work effectively with not only the Jamaican authorities, but also international partners to ensure that these recovery efforts are effective and sustainable.
Thank you very much, Jason. I think the private sector has to be seen in two sides, both as the beneficiary of the recovery when we're talking about small and medium-sized enterprises or micro enterprises, and also as a producer of resilience. So if we look at the infrastructure rebuilding, looking at public-private partnerships and resilience standards, just as what has just been talked about, mobilizing private capital through climate resilient PPP frameworks for roads, water systems, and energy grids. I think this is really critical because what we've seen happening in much of our infrastructure is the poor construction to begin with, small rainfall, and the roads begin to be dug up. So we need to look at how we're spending our money on making sure that the kinds of standards that we are operating on are Category 5 standards and flood-resistant designs. Important also is the financial tools and MSME recovery, expand the parametric microinsurance, and I'm great to hear that there is an opportunity for that for farmers, fishers, and MSMEs, create blended finance facilities for low interest recovery loans and credit guarantees. This blended finance is going to be really critical going forward here. Digital technology partnerships, looking at what can we have. I mean, satellite imagery, the LIDAR mapping, and digital twins for reconstruction planning, very, very important that we do this from a scientific perspective. And of course, the relief tracking, procurement transparency, and supply chain optimization could be better done through an implemented digital system. Modernizing mobilizing international capital. You talked about the bringing the diaspora in, and I think we should be looking at resilience bonds. The private sector should be doing this, and structural investment vehicles that can actually bring the diaspora into the reconstruction. And of course, leveraging multilateral guarantees to crowd in institutional investors. I think all of this needs, however, to be aligned with a national strategy, and all private sector engagement should align with a unified reconstruction framework to avoid fragmentation and absolutely ensure value for money.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Incredibly important points as well. I think one of the big takeaways from this conversation is coordination, working together, ensuring alignment to priorities. And I think, as well as the Honorable Minister said in his opening comments, that Jamaica is at a crossroads, right? And I think this conversation will hopefully help to ensure that Jamaica continues on the radar screen of those watching internationally, of the importance of not just focusing, which is vital, on the short-term needs, but also on the medium and the long term, especially as we look to hurricane season next year, and how to do our part to ensure that there's more resilient infrastructure that's built back, and doing that in coordination with the fiscal space that allows for the short-term recovery efforts as well. And the vulnerability, as you were laying out, Elizabeth, in your 3 points earlier, the vulnerability of the population at this point, and the need for continued heightened international attention and awareness. I want to end by thanking Patricia for Francis joining us from Jamaica, Isaac Anthony from Berlin, and Elizabeth Riley in Barbados just got back from Jamaica, and the Honorable Minister Samuda, of course, and the important efforts that he and the government of Jamaica are doing in regard to relief efforts, and of course Adrian Arst, who joined us to open today's conversation, and my colleague Maite Gonzalez-Latour for putting this all together. So please count on the Atlantic Council, Adrian Arst Latin America Center, and our Caribbean initiative to continue to draw attention and awareness to Jamaica and the broader importance of relief efforts post Hurricane Melissa, but also as we look to ensuring resilient infrastructure moving ahead. With that, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.